In Desert and Wilderness, Chapter 3. Both engineers left the following night for Cairo, where they were to visit the British Minister Plenipotentiary and hold an audience with the Viceroy. Staś calculated that this would require 2 days, and his calculation appeared accurate, for on the third day at night he received from his father, who was already at Medinet, the following message. The tents are ready. You are to leave the moment your vacation begins. Inform Fatma through Hadigi that we could not accomplish anything for her. A similar message was also received by Madame Olivier, who at once, with the assistance of the negress Dinah, began to make preparations for the journey. The sight of these preparations gladdened the hearts of the children, but suddenly an accident occurred which deranged their plans and seemed likely to prevent their journey. On the day on which Staś's winter vacation began, and on the eve of their departure, a scorpion stung Madame Olivier during her afternoon nap in the garden. These venomous creatures in Egypt are not usually very dangerous, but in this case the sting might become exceptionally baleful. The scorpion had crawled onto the headrest of the linen chair and stung Madame Olivier in the neck at the moment when she leaned her head against the As she had suffered lately from erysipelas in the face, fear was entertained that the sickness might recur. A physician was summoned at once, but he arrived 2 hours later, as he had an engagement elsewhere. The neck and even the face were already swollen, after which fever appeared and the usual symptoms of poisoning. The physician announced that under these circumstances there could not be talk of a journey and ordered the patient to bed. In view of this, it seemed highly probable that the children would be compelled to pass the Christmas holidays at home. In justice to Nell, it must be stated that in the first moments particularly she thought more of the suffering of her teacher than of the lost pleasures in Medinet. She only wept in corners at the thought of not seeing her father for a few days. Staś did not accept the accident with the same resignation. He first forwarded a dispatch and afterwards mailed a letter with an inquiry as to what they were to do. The reply came in 2 days. Mr. Rawlinson first communicated with the physician, having learned from him that immediate danger was removed and that only a fear of recurrence of erysipelas prevented Madame Olivier's departure from Port Said. He, above all, took precaution that she should have proper care and nursing, and afterwards sent the children permission to travel with Dinah. Whereas Dinah, notwithstanding her extreme attachment to Nell, was not able to take care of herself on the railways and in the hotels, the duties of guide and paymaster during the trip devolved upon Staś. It can easily be understood how proud he was of this role and with what chivalrous spirit he assured little Nell that not a hair would fall from her head, as if in reality the road to Cairo and to Medinet presented any difficulties or dangers. All preparations having been completed, the children started that very day for Ismaila by way of the canal. From Ismaila they were to travel by rail to Cairo, where they were to pass the night. On the following day they were to leaving Ismaila. They saw Lake Timsah, which Staś already knew, as Pan Tarkowski, being an ardent sportsman, in moments free from his duties, had taken Staś along with him to hunt for aquatic birds. Afterwards the road ran along Wadi Tumilat, close to the freshwater canal leading from the Nile to Ismaila and Suez. This canal had been dug before the Suez Canal, so the working men working on the Lesseps grand achievement would not be deprived entirely of water fit for drinking purpose. But its excavation had yet another fortunate result for this region, which before was a sterile desert, bloomed anew when through it coursed a strong and life-bringing stream of fresh water. The children could observe on the left side of the windows of the coach a wide belt of verdure composed of meadows, pastured horses, camels and sheep, and of tilled fields diversified with maize, millet, alfalfa and other varieties of plants used for fodder. On the bank of the canal could be seen all kinds of wells in the shape of large wheels with buckets attached, or in the usual form of well sweeps, which fellahs laboriously carried to the garden beds or conveyed in barrels or wagons drawn by buffaloes. Over the sprouting grain pigeons soared, and at times a whole covey of quails sprang up. On the canal banks storks and cranes gravely stalked. In the distance above the mud hovels of the fellahs towered like plumes of feathers the crowns of date palms. On the other hand, on the north side of the railway there stretched a stark desert, but unlike the one which lay on the other side of the Canal Suez. That one looked as level as would the bottom of the sea, from which the water had disappeared and only wrinkled sand remained, while here the sand was more yellowish, heaped up as if in great knolls covered on the sides with tufts of great vegetation. Between the knolls, which here and there changed into high hills, lay wide valleys, in which from time to time caravans could be seen moving. From the windows of the car the children could catch sight of heavily loaded camels walking in a long string, one after another, over the sandy expanse. In front of each camel was an Arab in a black mantle with a white turban. Little Nell was reminded of the pictures in the Bible which she had seen at home, representing the Israelites entering Egypt during the times of Joseph. They were exactly the same. Unfortunately, she could very well, as at the windows on that side of the car sat two English officers who obstructed her view. But she had scarcely told this to Staś when he turned to the officers with a very grave mien and, touching his hat with his finger, said, "Gentlemen, could you kindly make room for this little miss who wishes to look at the camels?" Both officers accepted the suggestion with the same gravity, and one of them not only surrendered his place, lifted her and placed her in a seat near the window. And Staś began his This is the ancient land of Goshen, which Pharaoh gave to Joseph for his brother Israelites. At one time in far antiquity a canal of fresh water ran here, so that this new one is but a reconstruction of the old. But later it fell into ruin and the country became a desert. Now the soil again is fertile. How does the gentleman know this? Asked one of the officers. At my age we know such things, answered Staś. And besides, not long ago Professor Sterling gave us a lecture on Wadi Tumilat. Though Staś spoke English quite fluently, his slightly different accent attracted the attention of the other officer, who asked, "Is the little gentleman an Englishman?" Miss Nell, whose father entrusted her to my care on this journey, is little. I'm not an Englishman, but a Pole, and a son of an engineer at the canal. The officer, hearing the answer of the pert boy, smiled and said, "I esteem the Poles. I belong to a regiment of cavalry, which during the times of Napoleon several times fought with the Polish Uhlans, and the tradition forms its glory and honor." "I am pleased to form your acquaintance," answered Staś. The conversation easily proceeded further, for the officers were evidently amused. It appeared that both were also riding from Port Said to Cairo to see the British Minister Plenipotentiary and to receive final instructions for a long journey, which soon The younger one was an army surgeon, while the one who spoke to Staś, Captain Glenn, had an order from his government to proceed from Cairo via Suez to Mombasa and assume the government of the entire region adjoining that port and extending as far as the unknown Samburu country. Staś, who with deep interest read about travels in Africa, knew that Mombasa was situated on the equator and that the adjoining country, though already considered to be within the sphere of English interests, was yet in truth little known. It was utterly wild, full of elephants, giraffes, rhinoceroses, buffaloes, and all kinds of antelopes, which the military, missionary, and trading expeditions always encountered. He also envied Captain Glenn with his whole soul and promised to visit him in Mombasa and go hunting with him for lions and buffaloes. "Good, but I shall invite you to make the visit with that little miss," replied Captain Glenn, laughing and pointing at Nell, who at that moment left the window and sat beside him. "Miss Rawlinson has a father," answered Staś, "and I am only her guardian during this journey." At this the other officer turned quickly around and asked, "Rawlinson? Is he not one of the directors of the canal, and he has a brother in Bombay?" "My uncle lives in Bombay," answered Nell, raising her little fingers upwards. "Then your uncle, darling, is married to my sister. My name is Clary. We are related. I am really delighted that I met and became acquainted with you, my little dear." And the surgeon was really delighted. He said that immediately after his sight he inquired for Mr. Rawlinson, but in the offices of the directory he was informed that he had left for the holidays. He expressed also his regret that the steamer which he with Captain Glenn was to take for Mombasa left Suez in a few days, in consequence of which he could not make a hurried visit to Medinet. He therefore requested Nell to convey his compliments to her father and promised to write to her from Mombasa. Both officers now engaged mainly in a conversation with Nell, so that Staś remained a little on the side. At all stations they had a plentiful supply of mandarin, oranges, dates and exquisite sherbet, and besides by Staś and Nell, those dainties were shared by Dinah, who, with all her good qualities, was known for her uncommon gluttony. In this manner the trip to Cairo passed quickly for the children. At the leave-taking the officers kissed Nell's little hands and face and squeezed Staś's right hand, and at the same time Captain Glenn, whom the resolute boy pleased very much, said half jokingly and half seriously, "Listen, my boy, who knows where, when and under what circumstances we may yet meet in life. Remember, however, that you can always rely upon my goodwill and assistance, and you may likewise rely upon me," Staś answered with a bow full of dignity.